The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook Farm as I knelt beside the chicken coop, gently examining the injured rooster's twisted leg. Old Red, as I'd come to call him, had been born with a deformity that made walking painful and slow. While the other farmhands saw him as worthless, I saw something different. A fierce spirit trapped in a broken body. My boss, Frank Morrison, had made it clear that every animal on his property needed to earn its keep, but I couldn't bring myself to give up on the crimson bird who greeted each dawn with unwavering determination. The other workers laughed at my attachment to what they called dead weight, but something deep in my gut told me Old Red was special. Little did I know that my stubborn compassion would soon change everything in our small Tennessee town. Frank's patience with my pet project had been wearing thin for weeks, and I could see the frustration building in his weathered face each time he caught me tending to Old Red. The farm was struggling financially, and every mouth to feed mattered when profit margins were razor thin. My fellow workers, Jake and Tommy, never missed an opportunity to remind me that sentiment had no place in the harsh reality of farm life. They'd grown up in families where practical decisions trumped emotional attachments, and they viewed my care for the disabled rooster as naive foolishness. The tension in the air was thick as molasses, and I knew a confrontation was inevitable. Yet every morning when Old Red hobbled to greet me with his distinctive crow, my resolve only grew stronger. The small town of Millbrook had always been close-knit, where everyone knew everyone else's business and gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Mayor William Hayes was a respected figure who'd brought prosperity to our community through his agricultural initiatives and business partnerships. His 8-year-old son, Timothy, was the apple of his eye. A bright, curious boy who often wandered the countryside exploring nature with the fearless abandon of childhood. The Hayes family lived in the grand Victorian house on Main Street, a symbol of stability and success in our rural community. None of us could have predicted that the threads of our simple lives were about to become entangled in ways that would test everything we believed about worth, purpose, and the unexpected heroes that walk among us. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, with the familiar symphony of roosters announcing the dawn across the valley. Frank Morrison stood in the doorway of the barn, his calloused hands gripping a steaming cup of coffee while his steel-gray eyes fixed on me with unmistakable finality. "Sarah, I've been more than patient with your charity case, but this ends today," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that had clearly been weighing on him for weeks. The other farmhands gathered around, sensing the gravity of the moment as they watched our confrontation unfold. Old Red pecked at the ground nearby, oblivious to the fact that his fate hung in the balance of this conversation. I felt my heart racing as I prepared to fight for what I believed was right, even if it meant risking everything I'd worked for on this farm. "That rooster is costing us feed money we can't spare, and he's contributing nothing to the operation," Frank continued, his tone softening slightly as he saw the pain in my eyes. I'd been working on Morrison Farm for 3 years, ever since I'd graduated high school and decided that college wasn't for me. The work was hard but honest, and I'd found peace in the rhythm of rural life, far from the chaos of the city where I'd grown up. My parents had never understood my choice to trade potential for simplicity, but here among the animals and endless fields, I discovered something resembling happiness. Now, faced with choosing between my job and my principles, I realized how much both meant to me. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Jake stepped forward, his work boots crunching on the gravel as he positioned himself beside Frank with obvious solidarity. "She's been babying that bird for months, boss," he said, shooting me a look that mixed pity with frustration. Tommy nodded in agreement, crossing his arms over his chest as he prepared to deliver what he clearly thought was the voice of reason. "We all know that Rooster ain't never gonna be right," Tommy added, his words cutting through the morning air like a blade. "It's just prolonging the inevitable, and Sarah's letting her emotions cloud her judgment." I watched as the 2 men I'd worked alongside for years aligned themselves against me, their faces showing no trace of the camaraderie we'd shared during countless long days of labor. The betrayal stung worse than I'd expected, but it also strengthened my resolve to stand my ground. "Old Red might not be perfect, but he's got more heart than any animal I've ever known," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. The rooster in question had hobbled closer during our discussion, as if sensing that his future was being decided by the humans around him. His bright red comb caught the morning sunlight, and despite his disability, he carried himself with a dignity that commanded respect. Every morning he calls in the dawn just like the others, and he protects the hens from hawks and foxes even though it's harder for him to move quickly. Frank's expression remained unchanged, but I caught a flicker of something, maybe understanding, maybe just weariness, in his eyes. The farm had been in his family for 4 generations, and I knew the pressure he felt to keep it profitable in an increasingly difficult agricultural economy. The conversation took a turn I hadn't expected when Frank pulled out his worn leather wallet and counted out my final week's pay. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't afford to keep someone who puts sentiment over business," he said, extending the bills toward me with obvious reluctance. My hands trembled as I took the money, realizing that my stubbornness had just cost me not only my job but also my home, since my small apartment above the equipment shed came with a position. Jake and Tommy looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with the finality of the moment and perhaps questioning whether they'd pushed too hard for this outcome. The weight of unemployment settled on my shoulders like a heavy blanket, but I refused to let them see me break. "I'll pack my things and be gone by evening," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying all the dignity I could muster. As I turned to walk away, Old Red followed me with his uneven gait, seemingly understanding that our fates were now intertwined. The irony wasn't lost on me that the 2 outcasts of Morrison Farm were now facing an uncertain future together. Behind me, I could hear Frank giving instructions to Jake and Tommy about dividing up my responsibilities, but their voices seemed to fade as I focused on the path ahead. My old pickup truck sat in the gravel driveway, loaded with everything I owned, which wasn't much after 3 years of simple living. The morning that had started with such familiar routine had transformed into the beginning of something entirely unknown. Yet as Old Red settled into the passenger seat of my truck, his unwavering trust in me sparked a determination I didn't know I possessed. The drive away from Morrison Farm felt like leaving behind more than just a job. It was abandoning the only place I'd ever felt truly at peace. The rolling hills of Tennessee stretched out before us, painted in the golden hues of early autumn, offering both beauty and uncertainty in equal measure. Old Red sat quietly beside me, occasionally letting out a soft cluck as if offering comfort during our shared exile. I had no plan, no destination, and barely enough money to last a month, but something deep inside told me that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The radio played an old country song about second chances and new horizons, and for the first time since the confrontation, I allowed myself a small smile. Whatever lay ahead, Old Red and I would face it together, and somehow that made even the unknown seem manageable. As we passed the town limits of Millbrook, I caught a glimpse of the Hayes family's Victorian mansion in my rearview mirror, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. Mayor Hayes was probably getting ready for another day of community leadership, completely unaware that his life was about to intersect with ours in ways none of us could imagine. The thought struck me as oddly prophetic, though I couldn't explain why at the time. Old Red shifted beside me, his dark eyes alert and watchful as we ventured into whatever future awaited 2 unlikely companions, who just learned that sometimes standing up for what's right comes with a price neither expected nor wanted to pay. The Millbrook Motel sat on the edge of town like a forgotten relic from the 1960s, its faded pink paint and flickering neon sign offering cheap refuge for travelers and transients. I counted my remaining cash 3 times before approaching the desk clerk, an elderly woman named Dolores who eyed Old Red with suspicion and curiosity. "Honey, we don't usually allow livestock in the rooms," she said, her voice raspy from decades of cigarettes, but her eyes held a kindness that gave me hope. After explaining our situation and promising to pay a damage deposit I couldn't afford, she handed me the key to room 12 with a warning to keep the rooster quiet. The room smelled of disinfectant and old carpet, but it offered sanctuary and time to figure out our next move. Old Red seemed to approve of our temporary shelter, settling onto a threadbare armchair as if he'd been living in motels his entire life. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister in Nashville, asking about my usual Sunday call that I'd missed while dealing with the chaos of being fired. Emma had always been the successful one in our family, climbing the corporate ladder with the same determination I'd once put into farm work. Explaining my current situation felt like admitting failure, but I needed someone to know where I was in case things got worse. Lost my job standing up for an injured rooster, I typed, knowing how ridiculous it would sound but too tired to craft a more dignified explanation. Her response came quickly. That's so you need money. The offer of help felt both comforting and humiliating, but I declined, determined to find my own way forward even if I wasn't sure what that looked like yet. The local diner, Mel's Kitchen, became my second home over the next few days as I nursed cups of coffee and scoured the classified ads for work opportunities. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Betty, took pity on me after hearing my story and started bringing extra biscuits with my meals. "Sugar, everyone in town's heard about what happened at Morrison Farm," she said one afternoon, refilling my cup without being asked. "Opinions are split right down the middle about whether you're a saint or a fool." Her words stung because they reflected the same doubt that had been gnawing at me since leaving the farm. The rational part of my mind kept asking whether Old Red was really worth sacrificing my livelihood, while my heart insisted that some things mattered more than practical considerations. Old Red had become something of a local celebrity during our week at the motel, with curious townspeople stopping by to see the rooster that had cost a woman her job. Children pressed their faces against the window of room 12, delighted by the unusual sight of a chicken living indoors like a pet. Their parents whispered among themselves, debating whether my actions represented admirable compassion or misguided sentiment. The attention made me uncomfortable, but Old Red seemed to enjoy his newfound fame, preening and strutting despite his disability whenever visitors appeared. His confidence in the face of adversity continued to inspire me, even as my bank account dwindled and my future remained uncertain. The breakthrough came when Pastor Mitchell from First Baptist Church approached me at Mel's Kitchen on Thursday afternoon. Reverend Mitchell was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd ministered to Millbrook's spiritual needs for over 2 decades, earning respect across denominational lines through his genuine concern for others. "Sarah, I've been watching your situation unfold, and I believe the Lord has placed a burden on my heart to help," he said, sliding into the booth across from me with gentle authority. His offer was simple but generous. I could stay in the church's guest cottage behind the sanctuary in exchange for helping with maintenance and administrative work. The position wouldn't pay much, but it included housing for both Old Red and me, along with the dignity of honest work. Tears of relief blurred my vision as I accepted his offer, feeling for the first time since leaving Morrison Farm that maybe I hadn't made a terrible mistake after all. The cottage was small but charming, with 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a tiny porch that overlooked the church cemetery. Old Red immediately claimed the porch as his domain, establishing a routine of morning crows that served as an unofficial alarm clock for the neighborhood. Pastor Mitchell introduced me to the congregation the following Sunday, presenting me as someone who'd sacrificed worldly security for moral principle, a description that made me squirm with embarrassment but seemed to resonate with the parishioners. Several church members approached me after the service, offering everything from home-cooked meals to job leads in neighboring towns. Their kindness reminded me that communities could lift up their members during difficult times, even when those members were relative strangers who'd arrived under unusual circumstances. My new routine involved opening the church each morning, maintaining the grounds, and helping with various administrative tasks that kept Pastor Mitchell's ministry running smoothly. The work was different from farm labor but equally satisfying in its own way, offering structure and purpose during a period when both had been in short supply. Old Red adapted to our new environment with characteristic resilience, becoming a fixture around the church grounds where children delighted in his presence during Sunday school. Evening walks through Millbrook's quiet streets gave me time to reflect on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. While I still missed the farm and wondered if I'd made the right choice, the peace I felt suggested that sometimes life's most important decisions come from the heart rather than the head, even when the immediate consequences seem devastating. 3 weeks into my new life at the church, Mayor William Hayes made his first official visit to discuss the upcoming Harvest Festival with Pastor Mitchell. I was raking leaves in the cemetery when his black sedan pulled into the church parking lot, its polished surface reflecting the autumn sun like a mirror. Timothy Hayes bounded out of the passenger seat with the unbridled energy of an 8-year-old, immediately spotting Old Red on the cottage porch and racing toward him with obvious delight. "Dad, look at this awesome rooster," he called back to his father, who was engaged in serious conversation with Pastor Mitchell about municipal permits and safety regulations. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself smiling as I watched him kneel beside Old Red, completely unaware of the bird's disability or the controversy that had brought us together. Children, I reflected, saw the world with a clarity that adults often lost somewhere along the way to becoming responsible and practical. Timothy's fascination with Old Red quickly evolved into a daily routine during the week leading up to the Harvest Festival. Every afternoon after school, he would walk to the church and spend an hour talking to the rooster as if they were old friends sharing secrets. "He's really smart, Miss Sarah," Timothy told me one afternoon, his face glowing with the innocent wisdom that only children possess. "He always knows when I'm sad about something, and he comes over to make me feel better." I watched their interaction with growing amazement, seeing how Old Red responded to the boy's presence with a gentleness I'd never witnessed before. The rooster would position himself carefully next to Timothy, allowing the child to stroke his feathers while maintaining a protective alertness that suggested he understood his role as companion and guardian. The mayor initially viewed his son's attachment to Old Red with polite tolerance, the kind of bemused patience parents show toward their children's temporary obsessions. William Hayes was a practical man who'd built his political career on measurable results and sensible policies, making Timothy's emotional connection to a disabled farm animal seem like harmless childhood whimsy. "Boys and their pets," he said to Pastor Mitchell with a chuckle, watching through the church office window as Timothy and Old Red explored the grounds together. However, I noticed something deeper in the mayor's expression when he thought no one was looking. A wistfulness that suggested he envied his son's ability to find joy in simple companionship. Politics had consumed most of William Hayes' adult life, leaving little room for the kind of uncomplicated relationships that his son was discovering with a lame rooster. The Harvest Festival preparations intensified as October deepened, transforming the church grounds into a bustling center of community activity. Volunteers erected booths for games and food vendors, while local farmers arranged displays of their finest produce to celebrate another successful growing season. Old Red became an unofficial mascot for the event, with several families specifically requesting that he be included in the children's petting area despite concerns about his disability. "That bird's got more personality than most people I know," commented Mrs. Henderson, who was organizing the festival's livestock exhibition. Her endorsement carried weight in Millbrook, where her family had been raising prize-winning cattle for 3 generations. I felt a surge of vindication hearing respected community members recognize what I'd seen in Old Red from the beginning. That worth couldn't be measured solely by conventional standards of productivity or perfection. Timothy's excitement about the festival reached fever pitch when he learned that Old Red would be featured prominently in the children's activities. "Miss Sarah, can you teach me how to take care of Rooster so I can help during the festival?" he asked, his eyes bright with enthusiasm and responsibility. His genuine desire to contribute touched something deep in my heart, reminding me why I'd risked everything to protect Old Red in the first place. Over the following days, I taught Timothy the basics of poultry care: how to provide fresh water, distribute feed, and recognize signs of illness or distress. The boy absorbed every lesson with the intensity of a scholar, taking careful notes in a small notebook he'd designated specifically for rooster care. His dedication impressed even Pastor Mitchell, who commented that Timothy's commitment rivaled that of seminary students preparing for ministry. As the festival weekend approached, an unexpected complication arose when several out-of-town visitors expressed interest in purchasing Old Red as a novelty pet for their own properties. The offers were generous enough to solve my immediate financial concerns, but the thought of separating Old Red from Timothy, and from the community that had finally accepted him, felt like betrayal. "Money isn't everything, dear," Pastor Mitchell counseled when I confided my dilemma to him during one of our evening conversations. "Sometimes the Lord places us exactly where we need to be, even when the path seems unclear. His words resonated with the same intuition that had originally compelled me to defend Old Red at Morrison Farm. I realized that my relationship with the rooster had evolved beyond simple compassion into something resembling destiny, as if we were meant to be together for reasons I couldn't yet fully understand. The night before the festival, I sat on the cottage porch with Old Red in my lap, watching the sunset paint the Tennessee sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Timothy had stopped by earlier to wish us luck. His excitement barely contained as he talked about all the people who would meet Old Red the following day. The boy's confidence in his feathered friend was absolute, unmarred by doubt or practical considerations about appearance or ability. As darkness settled over Millbrook and the first stars appeared overhead, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something significant was about to happen. Old Red seemed to share this feeling, remaining unusually alert and watchful as night sounds began their familiar symphony across the countryside. Neither of us could have predicted that the next 24 hours would transform us from local curiosities into heroes, proving that sometimes the most unlikely champions emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. The Harvest Festival dawned crisp and clear, with a kind of perfect autumn weather that made Tennessee feel like paradise on earth. Families began arriving at the church grounds before sunrise, their cars and pickup trucks creating a colorful procession along the narrow country road. Old Red seemed to sense the significance of the day, strutting around the cottage porch with more energy than I'd seen since his injury. His crow announcing the festivities with unusual enthusiasm. Timothy appeared at my door before I'd finished my morning coffee, dressed in his best jeans and a flannel shirt, carrying a small basket of treats he'd prepared for Old Red throughout the week. "Today's going to be the best day ever, Miss Sarah," he declared with the absolute certainty that only children can muster, and somehow his confidence became contagious. The festival opened officially at 10 o'clock with Mayor Hayes cutting a ceremonial ribbon while photographers from the local newspaper captured the moment for posterity. The crowd was larger than anyone had anticipated, with visitors coming from neighboring counties to experience Millbrook's famous community celebration. Food booths offered everything from apple cider to barbecued pork, while game stations provided entertainment for children and adults alike. Old Red's debut in the petting area drew immediate attention, with families gathering around to meet the rooster who'd become legendary for inspiring such devoted care. Children petted his feathers with gentle reverence, while their parents asked me about his story, many nodding with understanding when I explained the circumstances that had brought us together. By noon, Old Red had become the unofficial star of the festival, with a steady stream of visitors seeking him out specifically. Timothy appointed himself as the rooster's official tour guide, explaining Old Red's personality and preferences to anyone who would listen. "He likes it when you scratch behind his neck, but you have to be gentle because of his hurt leg," the boy instructed a group of fascinated preschoolers, his authority on the subject unquestioned despite his young age. I watched with growing amazement as Old Red seemed to understand his role as ambassador, remaining calm and friendly even when surrounded by excited children and curious adults. The transformation from farm outcast to community celebrity felt surreal, but I couldn't deny the joy it brought to see others appreciating what I'd recognized in him from the beginning. The afternoon brought competitive events that showcased local talents and traditions, from pie-eating contests to square dancing demonstrations. Mayor Hayes served as master of ceremonies, his political charm evident as he moved through the crowd, shaking hands and posing for pictures with constituents and visitors alike. Timothy stayed close to Old Red and me, clearly proud to introduce his father to his new friend and eager to share every detail of what he'd learned about rooster care. "Dad, did you know that roosters can live for 8 to 15 years if they're properly cared for?" he asked during one of the mayor's brief visits to our area. William Hayes smiled indulgently at his son's newfound expertise, but I noticed him studying Old Red with growing interest, as if seeing the bird through Timothy's eyes was revealing qualities he'd initially missed. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the festival grounds in golden light, the day's final event was announced. A children's talent show featuring local kids displaying their various skills and hobbies. Timothy had secretly entered himself and Old Red as a demonstration team, planning to show the audience how well they worked together despite the rooster's physical limitations. "Miss Sarah, Old Red and I have been practicing something special," he confided as we prepared for their performance. His excitement barely contained. The sight of this 8-year-old boy taking such pride in showcasing his friendship with a disabled rooster touched something deep in my soul. I realized that Timothy had learned the same lesson I discovered at Morrison Farm. That value couldn't be measured by conventional standards, and that sometimes the most important relationships were with those who needed us most. Their performance was simple but profound, with Timothy demonstrating the daily care routine he'd learned while Old Red cooperated with gentle patience. The audience watched in respectful silence as the boy explained each step, from providing fresh water to checking for signs of illness, treating his feathered partner with a kind of dignity usually reserved for show animals. "Old Red might not be perfect, but he's perfect for me," Timothy concluded, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd with surprising authority. The applause that followed was thunderous, but what moved me most was seeing the tears in several adults' eyes as they witnessed this pure example of acceptance and love. Mayor Hayes stood at the edge of the crowd, his political composure replaced by unmistakable paternal pride as he watched his son demonstrate values that couldn't be taught in any classroom. As evening approached and families began packing up their belongings, I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that Old Red had not only survived his public debut but had thrived in ways that exceeded my wildest expectations. Children who'd initially been curious about the special rooster were now asking their parents if they could adopt disabled animals of their own, while adults discussed the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to find true worth. Timothy was exhausted but exhilarated, chattering non-stop about plans for future festival appearances and advanced training sessions for Old Red. The mayor approached me as I was preparing to return to the cottage, his expression more serious than I'd seen all day. "Sarah, I want to thank you for what you've done for my son," he said quietly. His politician's facade dropped completely. "Timothy has learned something today that no amount of money or education could have taught him. And it's all because of your courage in standing up for that rooster." His words felt like vindication for every doubt I'd harbored since leaving Morrison Farm, confirming that some decisions were worth making regardless of their immediate cost. The week following the Harvest Festival brought an unexpected calm to our routine, as if the community needed time to process what they'd witnessed during Timothy and Old Red's performance. I resumed my regular duties around the church grounds, but now neighbors would stop to chat when they saw me working, asking about Old Red's health and sharing stories about their own experiences with animals that others had deemed worthless. Mrs. Peterson, who lived 2 blocks away, confided that Timothy's demonstration had inspired her to adopt an elderly cat from the animal shelter instead of the kitten she'd originally planned to get. "That boy showed us all that love doesn't require perfection," she said, her words echoing a sentiment I'd been hearing throughout the week from various community members who'd been touched by what they'd seen. Timothy's visits to the church became even more frequent after the festival, with Mayor Hayes often accompanying his son for what appeared to be casual stops but felt more like purposeful observations. I noticed the mayor studying Old Red with the same analytical attention he brought to municipal planning, as if trying to understand what made this particular bird worth such devotion. During one of these visits, Timothy asked if he could bring his school friends to meet Old Red, and I agreed, thinking it might be educational for the other children. What I didn't anticipate was how word would spread throughout the elementary school, turning our small cottage into an unofficial field trip destination where teachers brought their classes to discuss themes of acceptance, responsibility, and the value of caring for those who are different. The attention was flattering but overwhelming, and I began to worry that Old Red might become stressed by the constant stream of visitors seeking inspiration or entertainment. Pastor Mitchell noticed my concern and suggested we establish visiting hours to give both Old Red and me some breathing room during the week. "Fame can be a burden, even for roosters," he said with his characteristic gentle humor, but I could see the wisdom in his observation. We posted a small sign by the cottage explaining when Old Red would be available for visits, and surprisingly, people respected the boundaries, often leaving small gifts of treats or toys during off hours to show their continuing support. The community's consideration touched me deeply, demonstrating that Millbrook's residents understood the difference between genuine care and mere curiosity. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was organizing church records in Pastor Mitchell's office, Timothy burst through the door with unprecedented urgency. "Miss Sarah, something's wrong with Old Red," he exclaimed. His face flushed from running and his breathing labored from panic. My heart stopped as I imagined the worst-case scenarios, and I rushed outside to find Old Red lying motionless on the cottage porch, his body positioned in an unnatural way that suggested illness or injury. Timothy knelt beside him, tears streaming down his cheeks as he gently stroked the rooster's feathers and whispered words of comfort and encouragement. "He was fine this morning when I left for school, but when I came to visit him just now, he was like this," the boy explained, his voice breaking with emotion and fear. Dr. Sarah Williams, Millbrook's only veterinarian, arrived within 15 minutes of my frantic phone call, her professional demeanor immediately reassuring despite the gravity of the situation. She examined Old Red with thorough precision while Timothy and I watched anxiously, our hands clasped together in mutual support as we waited for her diagnosis. "It appears to be a seizure disorder, possibly related to his original injury," she explained after completing her examination, her words hitting me like physical blows. "These episodes can occur in birds with neurological damage, and while they're not necessarily fatal, they do indicate that his condition is more complex than we initially realized." The technical explanation felt inadequate to describe the terror of seeing Old Red so vulnerable, and I struggled to process the implications of what Dr. Williams was telling us. Timothy's reaction surprised me with its maturity and determination, as he immediately began asking practical questions about treatment options and care protocols rather than dissolving into the despair I'd expected from an 8-year-old. "Can we do anything to help him feel better?" he asked Dr. Williams, his voice steady despite the tears still visible on his cheeks. "Will he be able to live a normal life, or will this happen again?" The veterinarian's respect for Timothy's genuine concern was evident as she answered his questions with the same thoroughness she'd use with an adult client. She prescribed medication to help prevent future seizures and provided detailed instructions for monitoring Old Red's condition, emphasizing the importance of maintaining his regular routine while watching for warning signs of another episode. As evening approached and Old Red began showing signs of recovery, sitting up and drinking water under Dr. Williams' careful supervision, I realized that this crisis had deepened the bond between Timothy and the rooster in ways that good times never could. The boy had proven himself capable of handling genuine responsibility during a medical emergency, demonstrating emotional strength that belied his young age. Mayor Hayes arrived just as Dr. Williams was packing up her equipment, and I watched his expression transform from concern to amazement as Timothy efficiently recounted the entire episode, including specific details about symptoms and treatment protocols. "Son, I'm proud of how you handled this situation," the mayor said, placing his hand on Timothy's shoulder with obvious respect. "You showed real courage today, and Old Red is lucky to have someone who cares about him as much as you do." The praise seemed to give Timothy renewed energy, and he spent the remainder of the evening sitting beside Old Red, reading aloud from his favorite book while the rooster rested peacefully in his lap. The morning after Old Red's seizure brought an unusual visitor to the church grounds in the form of Frank Morrison, my former boss, whose pickup truck stirred up clouds of dust as he pulled into the parking lot. I hadn't seen him since the day he'd fired me, and his presence felt like a confrontation with a past I'd been trying to move beyond. He approached the cottage with obvious discomfort, his weathered hands fidgeting with his baseball cap as he struggled to find words for whatever had brought him here. "Sarah, I heard about what happened yesterday with your rooster," he began, his voice carrying a heaviness I'd never heard before. "I also heard about the festival and how that boy took to caring for the bird." His eyes avoided mine as he spoke, focusing instead on Old Red, who was recovering on the porch under Timothy's watchful supervision despite it being a school day. Frank's visit coincided with Timothy's decision to skip classes in order to monitor Old Red's condition, a choice that had required negotiating with both his father and his teacher. Mayor Hayes had initially objected to the absence, citing the importance of education and routine, but Timothy's passionate argument about responsibility and loyalty had eventually worn down his father's resistance. "Old Red needs me today, Dad," the boy had insisted during their breakfast conversation, which I'd overheard through the cottage's thin walls. "Miss Sarah taught me that when someone you care about is sick, You don't abandon them just because other things are more convenient. The mayor's capitulation came with conditions about making up missed schoolwork and maintaining good grades, but his acquiescence demonstrated how much Timothy's dedication had impressed him over the past few weeks. I've been doing some thinking since you left the farm, Frank continued, his admission coming slowly and with obvious difficulty. Jake and Tommy have been handling your responsibilities, but something's been missing from the operation. A kind of attention to detail that I didn't fully appreciate until it was gone. His words felt like vindication, but I found myself more interested in Old Red's well-being than in rehashing past grievances. Timothy had positioned himself as a buffer between the adults and his patient, clearly protective of the Rooster's need for peace and quiet during recovery. The boy reminds me of you when you first started working for me, Frank observed, watching Timothy adjust Old Red's water dish with practiced care. Same stubborn dedication to doing what's right, even when others don't understand the reasoning behind it. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Frank pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and extended it toward me with trembling hands. This is your severance pay, plus what I should have paid you for the overtime hours you worked without compensation, he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. I know it doesn't make up for how things ended, but I wanted you to know that I recognize my mistake. The money represented more financial security than I'd had in weeks, but accepting it felt complicated by the history between us and the principles that had led to our original conflict. Timothy looked up from his position beside Old Red, his young face showing curiosity about the adult drama unfolding around him, but his primary attention remained focused on his patient's comfort and recovery. I'm not asking for you to come back to work, Frank continued before I could respond to his offer, but I wanted to apologize for not seeing what you saw in that Rooster, and for not appreciating the kind of employee who puts compassion ahead of convenience. His apology felt genuine, but it also highlighted the fundamental difference in our worldviews that had made our working relationship untenable. I respected Frank's honesty in admitting his error, but I also understood that our values remained incompatible in ways that couldn't be resolved through financial compensation or retroactive recognition. Thank you for the apology, I said finally, accepting the envelope while making it clear that our professional relationship was permanently concluded. But Old Red and I have found where we belong, and it's not at Morrison Farm. Timothy's reaction to this exchange surprised me with its diplomatic wisdom, as he thanked Frank for acknowledging Old Red's worth, while also making it clear that he expected the Rooster to remain at the church permanently. Old Red is happy here, the boy explained with a kind of simple logic that cut through adult complications like a knife through butter. He has friends who care about him, and people who understand that being different doesn't mean being worthless. Frank nodded slowly, his respect for Timothy's perspective evident despite the implicit criticism of his own past behavior. As my former boss prepared to leave, he paused to study Old Red one final time, and I thought I saw something resembling regret in his expression. Not just for losing a good employee, but for failing to recognize value that had been right in front of him all along. The afternoon brought Dr. Williams back for a follow-up examination, and her report was cautiously optimistic about Old Red's recovery prospects. The medication seems to be helping stabilize his neurological function, she explained while Timothy took careful notes in his Rooster Care notebook. With proper monitoring and continued treatment, there's no reason he can't live a long and relatively normal life. Timothy's relief was palpable, but his questions about long-term care requirements demonstrated that he understood the commitment involved in maintaining Old Red's health. The veterinarian's instructions were detailed and specific, covering everything from medication schedules to environmental modifications that would reduce stress and minimize seizure triggers. As she packed her equipment and prepared to leave, Dr. Williams praised Timothy's dedication, noting that few adult pet owners showed such thorough understanding of their animals' medical needs. You have the makings of an excellent veterinarian yourself, she told him, causing the boy's face to light up with pride and possibility. That evening, as Timothy sat beside Old Red reading stories about farm animals and rural adventures, Mayor Hayes joined me on the cottage porch for what felt like our first genuine conversation since I'd arrived in Millbrook. Sarah, I want you to know how much Timothy's friendship with Old Red has meant to our family, he began, his political polish replaced by parental sincerity. My son has learned lessons about loyalty, responsibility, and compassion that I could never have taught him through lectures or rules. His words carried weight because they came from a man who rarely spoke without calculating the political implications of his statements. Timothy talks about Old Red constantly at home, but more importantly, he started applying the same kind of caring attention to other aspects of his life. His schoolwork, his relationships with classmates, even his chores around the house. The transformation he described matched what I'd observed during Timothy's daily visits, where the boy's natural enthusiasm had been channeled into genuine responsibility and thoughtful consideration for others. The following week brought an unexpected crisis that would test everything Timothy and Old Red had learned about trust, courage, and the bonds that connect unlikely friends. Tuesday afternoon started normally, with Timothy arriving at the church after school to check on Old Red's continued recovery and help with the evening medication routine that had become second nature to both of them. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and approaching winter, creating the kind of crisp atmosphere that made outdoor activities irresistible to energetic 8-year-olds with time to spare. "Miss Sarah, can Old Red and I explore the woods behind the cemetery today?" Timothy asked, his eyes bright with adventure and confidence in his feathered companion's abilities. "I promise we won't go far, and I'll carry him if his leg starts bothering him too much." His request seemed reasonable given Old Red's improved health and Timothy's proven responsibility, so I agreed with the usual warnings about staying within sight of the church grounds. The woods that bordered Millbrook Cemetery had been a source of fascination for local children for generations, offering safe adventure within walking distance of town while providing habitat for the wildlife that made rural Tennessee so appealing. Timothy and Old Red disappeared into the tree line around 3:30. With the boy carrying a small backpack containing water, snacks, and Old Red's emergency medication as precautionary measures. I continued my afternoon duties around the church, occasionally glancing toward the woods and listening for Timothy's voice or Old Red's distinctive crow to confirm their continued presence nearby. The peaceful routine of normal Tuesday activities made what happened next feel even more shocking and surreal, like a nightmare intruding on an otherwise perfect dream of small-town tranquility and childhood innocence. At 4:15, Timothy's panicked screams shattered the afternoon calm, carrying across the cemetery with a kind of terror that makes every adult within hearing distance drop everything and run toward the source. I reached the woods in record time, following the sound of the boy's voice deeper into the underbrush than he'd promised to venture, my heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. What I found stopped me in my tracks. Timothy was trapped in an old hunting pit that had been concealed by decades of fallen leaves and debris, the depression deep enough to prevent his escape but thankfully not deep enough to cause serious injury from the fall. "Miss Sarah, I'm okay, but I can't get out," he called up to me, his voice shaking but controlled despite his frightening situation. "Old Red is up there with you. He ran for help when I fell, just like those stories about dogs saving people." Indeed, Old Red stood at the edge of the pit, agitated and vocal, clearly understanding that his young friend needed assistance beyond what a disabled Rooster could provide. The practical challenges of rescuing Timothy from the pit were complicated by its depth and the unstable nature of its earthen walls, which crumbled when I attempted to climb down to reach him. "Don't try to come down here, Miss Sarah," Timothy called, demonstrating wisdom beyond his years even in crisis. "The sides are too loose, and if you get stuck too, nobody will know where we are." His calm assessment of the situation impressed me even as my panic threatened to overwhelm rational thinking. Old Red continued his agitated pacing around the pit's perimeter, occasionally letting out calls that seemed designed to attract attention from anyone within hearing distance. The rooster's behavior reminded me of the legendary stories about animals guiding rescuers to trapped humans, and I realized that his instincts were proving more valuable than any human rescue training could have provided. My cell phone had no signal in the wooded area, forcing me to make the agonizing decision to leave Timothy temporarily while I ran back to the church to call for help. "I'll be right back with help," I promised, though leaving him felt like abandonment despite being the only logical course of action. "Old Red will stay with you until I return." The rooster seemed to understand his assignment, settling near the pit's edge where Timothy could see him and draw comfort from his presence. Pastor Mitchell immediately called 911 when I burst into his office with news of the emergency. And within minutes the church parking lot was filled with rescue vehicles and emergency personnel responding to reports of a child trapped in the woods. Mayor Hayes arrived simultaneously with the fire department, his face pale with parental terror as he learned that his son was in danger and beyond immediate reach. The rescue operation was swift and professional, with firefighters using ropes and specialized equipment to extract Timothy from the pit without causing a collapse that might have injured him. Throughout the entire process, Old Red maintained his vigil at the pit's edge, refusing offers of food or water from well-meaning volunteers who tried to move him away from the action. "That rooster never left his post," commented Fire Chief Davidson as Timothy was finally lifted to safety, muddy but unharmed except for minor scrapes and badly shaken nerves. "I've seen search and rescue dogs with less dedication to their assignments." Timothy's first action upon reaching solid ground was to scoop Old Red into his arms, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down his dirt-streaked face as he thanked his feathered friend for staying with him during the scariest experience of his young life. Mayor Hayes' reaction to his son's rescue was a mixture of profound relief and newfound respect for the rooster he'd initially viewed as merely an interesting pet. "Timothy, you could have been seriously hurt if Old Red hadn't been there to guide Miss Sarah to your location," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he held his son close. "That bird proved himself a hero today, and our family owes him a debt we can never fully repay." The mayor's public acknowledgement of Old Red's role in the rescue carried significant weight in a community where his opinions influenced public sentiment. As emergency vehicles departed and normal activities resumed around the church grounds, I realized that this crisis had transformed Old Red's status from beloved pet to genuine local hero, proving that courage and loyalty weren't limited to creatures that met conventional standards of physical perfection. The evening news coverage of Timothy's rescue featured prominent mention of Old Red's role in the emergency response, with reporters describing him as the disabled rooster who helped save a mayor's son. The story spread beyond Millbrook's boundaries through social media and regional news networks, bringing national attention to our small town and the unlikely friendship that had captured hearts across the country. Timothy, still shaken but proud of his companion's heroism, insisted on being interviewed alongside Old Red, explaining to television cameras how the rooster had remained calm under pressure and demonstrated the kind of loyalty that humans aspired to achieve. "Old Red taught me that being different doesn't mean you can't be brave," Timothy told the reporter, his words carrying wisdom that resonated with viewers far beyond Tennessee's borders and cemented Old Red's reputation as a symbol of perseverance and devotion. The week following Timothy's rescue brought a media circus to Millbrook that none of us had anticipated or prepared for, with reporters and camera crews descending on our quiet town like locusts drawn to an unexpected feast. Old Red found himself at the center of attention that ranged from heartwarming human interest pieces to sensationalized accounts that barely resembled the truth of what had actually happened in the woods behind the cemetery. Timothy handled the interviews with remarkable poise for an 8-year-old, consistently redirecting attention from himself to Old Red's courage and intelligence, but I could see the strain of constant scrutiny wearing on both boy and rooster. Mayor Hayes attempted to manage the media frenzy through official press conferences, but the story had taken on a life of its own that defied political control or reasonable boundaries. The attention brought unexpected opportunities alongside its challenges, including offers from television shows, book publishers, and even Hollywood agents who saw commercial potential in Timothy and Old Red's friendship. A prominent publisher contacted Pastor Mitchell about rights to their story, while a cable network proposed a documentary about small-town heroes and the animals that inspire them. "We're not interested in exploiting what happened," Mayor Hayes stated firmly during a press conference on Thursday morning, his protective instincts as a father overriding any political advantages the publicity might have offered. "My son and Old Red have a genuine friendship that doesn't need to be commercialized or turned into entertainment for others." His stance earned respect from community members who'd been concerned about outside interests taking advantage of Millbrook's newfound fame. Timothy's reaction to the various offers was refreshingly practical, focusing on what the attention might mean for other animals who needed advocates rather than on personal benefits or recognition. "If people want to make movies about Old Red, they should make them about helping disabled animals find homes," he suggested during one particularly persistent interview request. There are lots of animals like Old Red who need someone to believe in them, and maybe if people see our story, they'll adopt some of those animals too. His mature perspective on using fame for positive purposes impressed adults, who'd initially worried that the attention might go to his head or distract him from more important priorities like school and family responsibilities. The constant stream of visitors and reporters began taking a toll on Old Red's health, with Dr. Williams expressing concern about stress-related complications that could trigger additional seizures or other medical problems. Roosters aren't designed for this level of stimulation and disruption to their normal routines, she explained during an emergency consultation called after Old Red seemed unusually agitated and withdrawn. We need to establish boundaries that protect his well-being, even if it means disappointing people who want to meet him. Her professional recommendation led to the implementation of strict visiting hours and media restrictions that limited Old Red's exposure while still allowing the community to show their appreciation for his heroism. Pastor Mitchell supported these measures by posting clear guidelines around the church grounds and enlisting volunteers to help manage the crowds that continued arriving throughout the week. The breakthrough in managing the situation came when Mayor Hayes proposed establishing a permanent memorial to Old Red's heroism that would satisfy public interest while protecting the privacy and health of both Timothy and his feathered friend. We're going to create a small park area behind the church where people can come to reflect on the values that Old Red represents: courage, loyalty, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to find true worth, he announced during Friday's press conference. The memorial would include educational materials about caring for disabled animals and a scholarship fund for local students pursuing veterinary careers, turning the media attention into lasting benefits for the community. Timothy enthusiastically supported the plan, particularly the educational component that aligned with his desire to help other animals in need of advocacy and care. The memorial project galvanized Millbrook's residents around a shared purpose that transcended the temporary excitement of media attention, with local businesses and organizations volunteering resources and labor for the construction. Mrs. Henderson donated materials from her family's lumber business, while the high school's shop class took on the memorial bench as a semester project that would teach students practical skills while contributing to their community. Even Frank Morrison appeared at the worksite, offering equipment and expertise without fanfare or expectation of recognition, his contribution representing a quiet acknowledgement of the values he'd failed to appreciate during our time working together. The collaborative effort demonstrated how a small town could transform external attention into internal improvement, using Old Red's story as a catalyst for positive change rather than merely basking in reflected glory. By the end of the week, the media attention had begun to subside as newer stories captured national interest, but the impact on Millbrook was permanent and profoundly positive. Old Red had evolved from local curiosity to genuine hero to symbol of community values. His story inspiring residents to look for ways to support and celebrate differences rather than merely tolerating them. Timothy returned to his regular school schedule with new confidence and purpose, his experience with fame having taught him valuable lessons about staying true to personal principles despite external pressures. Old Red and I are just regular friends who happen to have an adventure, he told his classmates when they asked about all the excitement, his humility serving as a reminder that heroism often comes from ordinary creatures doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand courage and compassion. The mayor's evening visit to the cottage that Friday brought a conversation that felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another in our continuing story. Sarah, what started as my son's fascination with an unusual pet has become something much more significant for our entire community, he reflected, watching Old Red peck contentedly at seeds while Timothy read nearby. You've taught us all that standing up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient or unpopular, can lead to outcomes none of us could have imagined. His words carried the weight of political experience and personal growth, representing an acknowledgement that leadership sometimes meant learning from unexpected teachers, including disabled roosters and the people who refused to give up on them. As the sun set over Millbrook and normal routines gradually resumed, I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that Old Red's story had become permanently woven into the fabric of a community that now understood the difference between value and convenience, between worth and productivity, between the courage to stand alone and the wisdom to recognize when you're no longer standing alone at all. 6 months after Timothy's rescue, Millbrook had settled into a new normal that incorporated Old Red's celebrity status into the rhythm of small-town life without losing sight of the simple friendship that had started everything. The memorial park behind the church had become a popular destination for families and school groups, offering a peaceful space for reflection while educating visitors about animal welfare and the importance of compassion for creatures who might not meet conventional standards of usefulness. Timothy had grown 3 inches and gained confidence that transformed him from a curious boy into a natural leader among his peers, often guiding tours of the memorial and sharing Old Red's story with visitors who came seeking inspiration or simply hoping to meet the famous Rooster in person. My own life had stabilized in ways I couldn't have imagined during those desperate weeks at the Millbrook Motel, with Pastor Mitchell offering me a permanent position as the church's community outreach coordinator that allowed me to expand my work beyond simple maintenance tasks. The job involved coordinating volunteer activities, managing the memorial park, and developing programs that connected Millbrook's residents with opportunities to serve others. Work that felt like a natural extension of the values Old Red had taught me about finding worth in unexpected places. The salary wasn't substantial, but it provided security and purpose while allowing me to remain close to Old Red and continue our unlikely partnership in whatever adventures lay ahead. Timothy's commitment to animal welfare had evolved from casual interest into genuine passion, with his bedroom transformed into a research center filled with books about veterinary medicine, animal behavior, and conservation efforts around the world. He'd started a club at school called Friends of All Creatures that organized fundraising events for the local animal shelter and educational presentations about caring for pets with special needs. Old Red taught me that every animal has something important to offer if we just take time to understand them, he explained during a presentation to the Millbrook Rotary Club, his confidence and articulation impressing adults who remembered him as a shy child just months earlier. Mayor Hayes attended every one of his son's presentations, his parental pride evident as he watched Timothy develop skills and convictions that would serve him well regardless of whatever career path he eventually chose. The scholarship fund established in Old Red's honor had grown beyond local expectations, attracting donations from across the country and providing substantial support for students pursuing veterinary careers or animal-related studies. Dr. Williams served on the selection committee alongside Mayor Hayes and Pastor Mitchell, ensuring that recipients demonstrated not only academic potential but also the kind of compassionate commitment that Old Red's story represented. The first scholarship winner was Maria Santos, a senior from Millbrook High who planned to study veterinary medicine with a specialization in caring for animals with disabilities and special needs. Old Red showed me that every creature deserves a chance to prove their worth, she said during the award ceremony, her words echoing themes that had become central to our community's identity and values. Old Red himself had adapted to his role as a living symbol with characteristic grace, accepting attention when it was offered while maintaining the independent spirit that had first attracted Timothy's admiration. His health remained stable under Dr. Williams' continued care, with seizures becoming increasingly rare as we learned to manage his condition through medication, environmental modifications, and the kind of attentive monitoring that Timothy had perfected through months of dedicated observation. The Rooster's daily routine included morning walks around the memorial park, afternoon visits from Timothy and other children, and evening periods of quiet companionship that reminded me why I'd been willing to sacrifice everything to protect him in the first place. The transformation of Millbrook's culture was perhaps the most significant outcome of Old Red's story, with residents embracing values of inclusion and acceptance that extended far beyond animal welfare into human relationships and community decision-making. The town council established new policies for supporting citizens with disabilities, while local businesses began hiring practices that prioritized character and potential over conventional qualifications. Old Red's legacy isn't just about one rooster or one boy, Mayor Hayes observed during a speech celebrating the first anniversary of Timothy's rescue. It's about a community that learned to see value where others might see only problems, and to find strength in what makes us different rather than in what makes us the same. His words captured the essence of changes that had touched every aspect of life in Millbrook, creating ripple effects that would influence the town's character for generations to come. The evening of that anniversary celebration found Timothy, Old Red, and me sitting on the cottage porch, watching fireflies dance across the cemetery while reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought us to this point. Timothy had grown tall enough to no longer need a step stool to reach Old Red's favorite perch, but his gentle touch and patient attention remained unchanged from those first meetings months earlier. "Miss Sarah, do you think Old Red knows he's famous?" Timothy asked, his question carrying the kind of philosophical curiosity that had developed alongside his practical knowledge about animal care. I watched Old Red preen his feathers in the fading light, his movements confident and content, and realized that fame had never been the point for any of us. It was simply a byproduct of staying true to values that transcended public recognition or external validation. "I think Old Red knows he's loved," I replied, my words encompassing everything that mattered about our shared experience in Millbrook. The rooster settled into his evening routine with satisfaction that came from a life lived fully despite physical limitations, his presence serving as a daily reminder that worth couldn't be measured by conventional standards or determined by others' expectations. Timothy nodded thoughtfully, his understanding of these concepts now sophisticated enough to grasp their broader implications for how we treat all creatures, human and animal alike, who might not fit traditional definitions of success or capability. As stars began appearing in the Tennessee sky and Old Red tucked his head under his wing for the night, I felt profound gratitude for the stubborn compassion that had led me to defend a disabled rooster and, in doing so, discover a community that would embrace both of us exactly as we were. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibility, built on the foundation of friendship, courage, and the unshakable belief that every life has value worth defending, regardless of what others might think or say about the wisdom of such conviction.